When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to some blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
Hello, wrestling fans. This is Lanny Poffo, formerly the genius of WWE. You are listening to Crazy Train Radio. Ooh, yeah.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, childrens of all ages, the voice you are going to hear on the other end is no stranger to our show. However, he's got a new little project out, which I know he was talking about for a good couple years, which is rightfully so, in putting something like this together. Wrestling rings, blackboards, and movie sets. The author, Evan Ginzburg. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm relieved to have finally got this done. It was a 5-year process between writing 100 plus stories on my adventures and misadventures in pro wrestling, teaching, and filmmaking, including being an associate producer and acting with Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler.
Well, speaking of adventures, misadventures, and all that fun stuff, and obviously I am free-flowing here since I've known Evan for long enough. I don't need to dig deep, but speaking of all those adventures and misadventures, I'm going to start off with a little serious tone because as we sit and record this, it's January 26th, and next Sunday, April 2nd, will be sadly 2 years since we lost our buddy Lanny Poffo, which
February
is
February 2nd. Yeah, yeah.
hard to believe.
Yeah. Um, Lanny, I would book him as an agent, and he was a dear friend, and he would sleep on my couch. And my wife, who's from Korea, would make him healthy Korean soup, and he wouldn't put anything unhealthy into his body. He was quote unquote a health nut, which I don't mean anything derogatory by.
No, no.
And when he passed at age 68, I was shocked, just shocked. And it says a lot about the quote unquote wrestling life where for many, many years, you work 300 plus days a year and different time zones, a different plane every day, different smoke-filled arenas early on. In the 70s, he was wrestling in the 70s, 80s. They had smoke-filled arenas, and none of this is conducive to longevity. And he's on the cover and in the book, and so is Nikolai Volkoff. And why am I bringing him
Another
up?
guy
He was
who,
also a health nut, and Nikolai would forever, don't eat meat, don't drink soda, don't do this, don't do that, and he didn't make it to a ripe old age either. So he said to me once, Nikolai said, another dear friend, he said, I never knew you could be so tired that one night, he said, I fell asleep with my eyes open. I didn't know it was humanly possible. And they had these guys crisscrossing the country, and we did the movie 350 Days. Where's the title from? The NWA champions worked literally 350 days. Bret Hart, who was one of the stars of the film, wrestled, he told us 330 days. And Greg Valentine, who's in it, told us he wrestled 320 days a year. So, this is not a healthy lifestyle. And, throw in for some of them, not all. I mean, like I said, Nikolai and Lanny was squeaky clean, but some of these guys, you're talking sex, drugs, rock and roll on top of it. And there's a long line of dead before their time, as they used to say, good-looking young corpses. It's a brutal business, brutal business. And for the fans who blame the wrestlers, nobody should be asked to work 300 plus days a year and not get pensions, 401ks, and health plans. I mean, how are you not an employee?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before we dive deep into that, I poured myself a cocktail because I
You'll
wanted
need
to.
it by the time I'm done telling some of these
No,
stories, because they're not all happy endings.
no, trust me, you know me long enough, and I know these stories too. But I wanted to remember Lanny, and we can include Nikolai because I knew him
Oh,
through
yeah.
Nikita. So
When Nikolai died, Bret Hart said, quote, he was the nicest wrestler I ever met. And Bret Hart met everybody. So that right there,
that's legit.
yeah. You want a eulogy or whatnot. There it is. There it is.
You can. I know Nikita has told me time and time again when we joke about it, but you were talking about Nikolai being health conscious as well. And I know you probably know this story as well, especially on the road when they were running hard, when the expansion and all was happening there. Nikolai was one of the smart guys, and I don't know how many were in terms of if they were working a region, let's say the Northeast here, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, whatever, they would get a centralized hotel to try to make the travel easier. But what Nikolai would do is go to a food store and stock up and put stuff in his room for a few days instead of eating out and all that. He tried to be conscious and eat healthy that way. Am I wrong with that?
Oh, I roomed with him on the road as an agent, and why? Because he knew I would be early to bed, early to rise like him because he was so squeaky clean, and he didn't want a room sometimes with the iron sheik because you didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, the A
And
to Z with Cheeky.
and I like the Sheik very much also. I spent the weekend at his house, but that's a whole different story.
That was a longest week of your life for those 2 days.
It was pretty wild. So Nikolai would wake up 6 a.m. How do I know this? I was in two beds in a little hotel room, and he would wake up. He would pull out these little blocks that he carved in the old country, hand carved, and he would do 300 push-ups. 300 push-ups to start the day, 6 a.m. And then one morning he says to me, Evan, let's arm wrestle. And I'm not a 98-pound weakling. I'm 200 plus pounds. I go to the gym. So I go, okay, Nikolai, I can't move this man 1 inch, not 1 inch. He used to get on TV. He would make an apple explode in his bare hands. That's how powerful this guy was. And he was no kid at the time. When we were doing the autograph circuit, he was in his 60s or whatnot. And,
the old Danny Hodge apple tricker.
It would just on TV in the 70s, Blassie would go, squeeze, Nikolai, squeeze, and the apple would explode right into the camera. It was very dramatic. And if you only remember him teaming with the Sheik 10 years earlier, him and Bruno, that was a big feud. I mean, those guys played together, two powerhouses, and Nikolai was something.
And there was another guy there you mentioned, Bruno, who I got to know the last, I guess, let's say 5 years of his life, from the time he went to the Hall of Fame until his passing. Because there'd be times just phone calls, hey, Bruno, how you doing? Just to check in and stuff, because I try to treat people how they treat me. And Bruno was always nice to me, so occasionally call to check in, especially when you heard about the back and all that. How you doing, all that stuff. And, obviously some talk would go from his days in the ring and stuff. And he always spoke so highly of both Nikolai and the other guy he would always mention
Kowalski.
To me was... actually... Yes, but the other guy that came up often was George Steele.
Okay.
That he always spoke. It's like he would start talking, he'd get going and start telling, oh, well, this guy did this, and I did this with this guy. And, but it was always Kowalski, Steele, and Nikolai that he would talk about.
They wrestled each other literally hundreds of times, all three of them, hundreds and hundreds of times. Steele would come in basically every summer when his school term ended, and he would wrestle Pedro, Bruno, Backlund, even Hogan. I mean, Steele lasted a long time, and he was one of the smart ones because he had his day job with the benefits and the pension, and he made good money headlining for WWF and other territories, during the summer when he was free. So he was a smart guy. And Kowalski and Bruno, they really respected and loved each other. And Kowalski was a wonderful guy also. I have pieces on all of them in the book, all of them.
Well, I guess when it comes to the book, Evan, when would you say the concept and the idea came about in terms of telling these stories?
During COVID, and I tell this story early in the book. I said I was a teacher and I get a call from the boss, we're shutting down. I go to the gym. The gym says to me, the person working the front goes, we're shutting down because of COVID. I go to my diner where I always eat, and the guy goes, I can't make it just on takeout, we're shutting down. And I felt like even the movie theaters shut down. Everything I loved. And I was one of the, weekend, not a warrior. I was a heel manager. And the wrestling shut down. Everything I loved. And I felt like I was under house arrest with an ankle bracelet during COVID. And basically, once or twice a week, you would mask up. I mean, don't forget New York and Queens, New York, where I live, was like the epicenter. We had Kennedy and LaGuardia airports, immigrant areas, East Elmhurst, Corona. We had in Queens 800 people a day dying. I had 5 friends die during COVID, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get through this. I'm going nuts. And I said to myself, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to wake up every day and channel my energy. Instead of, couldn't go to the gym. That was closed. Every morning I would just start writing. And basically, I'm not going to say it's all grim, all tragic. No, there's a lot of funny stuff in here also, a lot of warm, poignant stuff. But some of this was putting ghosts to rest. Friends I lost, family, wrestlers, heroes. There's a piece on Bruno, and I titled it, It's Not Every Day Your Hero Dies. With the shock. I mean, he looked like a young man's body with an older guy's head. That's the best way you could explain Bruno at the end. The body was almost the same. I mean, he was in tremendous, tremendous shape. The eternal gym rat, and I say that in a positive way.
No.
And, and that's one of the pieces in there. Because it's funny. Sometimes I'll be talking to a wrestling fan that doesn't live in the New York or quote unquote WWF territory. And they'll say, I don't get Bruno. All he did was punch and kick. And I said, you had to be there because there was no pyro. There was no blaring entrance music. He would walk down the aisle in a pair of tights and we loved him. It was like Saint Bruno to us, In some Italian households, they would have pictures of Jesus, Frank Sinatra, and Bruno. This is where, this was where he was in the hierarchy.
Echelon of, yeah.
Yeah, in the echelon. Yeah. So people don't understand. Plus, back in the day, we were a mock audience. There was no internet. The sheets were primitive. They weren't really exposing the business. The sheets were basically trading results and, clippings. It was
fanzines and
like early fanzines. So, Bruno to us, every time somebody punched or kicked Bruno, we felt it. We felt it. And we made the comeback. It was us against the school bully. It was us against the boss or supervisor that tortured you. People don't understand the mentality of a 70s blue-collar audience, and WWF knew that audience. You had the Polish strongman, the Polish strongman Ivan Putski, the Italian Superman Bruno. You had Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson. You had, the Pedro Morales for the Puerto Rican audience, Victor Rivera. They knew their audience, and they catered to it, and different world.
Well, obviously, like I said, I'm free flowing here. I've known you for at least, that I can think of, at least 15 years at this point. But I know your dad was a taxi driver.
Yeah.
So I get, then you worked as a teacher for many, many years, etc., and still do some teaching. But where did the becoming a fan start? Was your dad a fan? Was it in the family? Where does the connection to wrestling?
Exactly what happened. This story is in the book. It's the 1970s, East Flatbush, Brooklyn. It's a rainy, nasty day, like some of the winter days we've been having this winter, but this is 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. So I'm bored. I'm just bored. There's no internet. There's no video games. This is the 70s. So I discover the UHF dial, if anybody remembers that. It was a UHF dial. And I start turning the thing. And then, okay, here's PBS. Here's some foreign language channels. Here's some, just snow, like you're not seeing anything. And I'm just, looking for entertainment. And all of a sudden, I see this big, monstrous guy pounding on this Native American Indian. And I don't even know what it is. And it turns out it's WWWF TV. And it's Chief Jay Strongbow. And he's getting pounded on. And all of a sudden he does like this herky-jerky, like war dance comeback, like 10 years before Hogan's comebacks.
The fire up and all.
Yeah, he's firing up. And I'm a kid. I'm like, wow, look at this. And he's beating up them. And Strongbow comes back and he's chopping. And the other guy's much bigger than him. I don't even remember who it was. And Strongbow wins the match. And I'm sitting there. I'm a kid with like my mouth open. I assume it's real. I have no idea. And I watched the rest of that show and I made a mental note. When is this on? And next week I watched it and the week after. And suddenly I was addicted to it. And then we had on UHF, we had wrestling from Florida with Gordon Soley, and we had wrestling from the Olympic Auditorium and John Tolis.
That would have been the Spanish channel, if I remember correctly.
That was the Spanish channel, channel 41. And I'm watching John Tolos with my dad and on the LA channel. And he's the greatest promo guy that people don't remember. Unbelievable. He could talk you into a seat. He wasn't a huge, monstrous guy. He was maybe 6 feet, 210 pounds, but he was always in good shape and tan and a great talker. And so Tolis comes to New York. I'm getting ahead of myself. So June 24, 1974, I'm begging my dad, please take me to wrestling. And he has tickets for the Garden, for Madison Square Garden. And I'm a kid. So I go with him to the Garden. We walk in the door. This is in the book. And the first thought that enters my head is, wow, it's in color. Because we had a black and white TV. Like, it's in color. It's like Dorothy landing in Oz, yeah. And I'm sitting there, and there's Black Gordman from LA TV. He happened to be on that card. And the main event is Bruno and Strongbow against Blassie and Nikolai. And the co-features, the Valiant Brothers against Dean Ho and Tony Gurria. And the building shook. And I'm like, it's like Marvel superheroes and supervillains come to life. I'm a kid. I think it's all real. They're bleeding. You're feeling every punch, that the heroes, the faces are taking. And we started going regularly. And that same summer, Tolos is wrestling Bruno because Tolos was hot on TV in New York. And Tolos gets on the promos and he goes, "That's spaghetti bender, Sammartino." And this was hot stuff back then,
Yeah.
Today they're cursing and, back, that was like, oh my God, everybody wanted to murder him. Like he's doing ethnic slurs, our hero.
Yeah.
And Bruno beat Tolos at the Garden. And then the Valiants wrestled Bruno and Strongbow. It was magic. You're a kid. They're like 10 feet tall to you. And some of them were Kowalski and Ernie Ladd and Andre. Oh my God, you're a kid. And we even started to wait outside the Garden for autographs and some interesting insights as a kid. I'm standing there. One, Andre and Dusty Rhodes would never sign for us kids. Wouldn't so much as look at us. So then the heels. Billy Graham's nice and Lou Albano's nice. The Grand Wizard was nice. They wouldn't, and I'm like, it's like exposing the business.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. You know how the fans always debate how big was Andre? The door was clearly marked 7 feet for deliveries. 7 feet.
Yeah.
It said on the door. He didn't have to duck. He didn't have to duck. The guy was like 6'10". The guy was like 6'10". So he was no 7'4". That was hype. That was
Yeah.
But and I loved Andre as a kid, in spite of the fact he wouldn't sign autographs. Andre wrestled Kowalski, and Andre wrestled Ernie Ladd, and Andre wrestled Killer Khan and Blackjack Mulligan. They put him in with these big monstrous guys. And Andre in the 70s and early 80s was top notch by Russell.
Drop kicks, and he was just amazing.
Yeah. He was great. People don't realize in the 70s the guy was great.
Yeah, because obviously I was born in '84, and I remember watching. It was all my great grandfather's fault. I say that tongue in cheek. He was an old school wrestling fan. He obviously had moved to Florida at that point, but he was a New York territory guy. Because when he moved to the States as a little kid in the teens, he lived in Jersey. So he grew up in this region, watched wrestling in this region, the whole bit. So, but I remember Andre with, when he had the back issues and just towards the end of his career. But John Tolos, I want to bring this up before I forget. For those of my generation, they would remember him as the coach when he was working with Perfect in 89, 90. So that's a reference point of who we're talking about.
And he also worked for Herb Abrams' UWF. They may know him.
Yes. So with Tolos, I know it's been one of those ongoing projects, etc. And I actually just got a phone call from him before we started at the end of the football game. Dr. Mike, who I met through you. And so how is that project going with the Tolos book?
Great. We that's going to be my next book with Dr. Mike. And Mike, for those who don't know, he's a very well-known wrestling photographer. He worked all the territories. He was at Tolos's wake. He was one of the at the funeral. He was one of the pallbearers. I mean, that's how close they were. And I just loved Tolos as a kid. And what we're doing is an oral history of him with, his friends, his family, his fellow wrestlers, just telling his whole life story. And I had an extensive interview that I had done with him with my old sheet. And I got other interviews with him. So it's going to be interesting. It's an oral history, and part of it is him telling his own life story, and it'll go in chronological order with some great photos. And we love this guy, and he deserves a book. I mean, anybody that was around in the 70s, even into the 80s, I mean, he was a star in the 50s, 60s, and in the 70s, he was huge. Him and Blassie wrestled in front of 27,000 people.
Out in the West Coast, right?
Yeah. In California. That was like WrestleMania before WrestleMania, this loaded show, 27,000 people for, a territory. That was an amazing crowd.
Exactly. And it's funny, and that was promoted by the LaBelles, so people know. And it's funny because, speaking of LaBelles, and you'll appreciate this because you are familiar with him, Gene LaBelle. I was just recently in California, folks, as many of the listeners all know. And, and of course I get phone calls and texts from everybody going, picked a hell of a time to come out here with the wildfires and all that stuff. So anyway, I was hanging out at a friend's martial arts school for a few days, got to participate in some classes and whatnot for grappling and all that fun stuff. And I met a wonderful young lady who is now becoming a friend and such, and she's going to be involved with the show, which is great. And she was asking, she heard me and the gentleman who runs the school talking about Gene LaBelle. and she has different trainings and different martial arts. She's gotten into it the last couple of years. So she goes, "Who is this?" Well, she asked about an actor friend of ours, but she also asked about Gene LaBelle. Who's this Gene LaBelle you guys are talking about? So for the next 3 hours, she skips the rest of the classes for the evening, and I'm sitting here telling her stories about Gene and things I've learned from my buddy Anthony and from Steven, who runs the school. And do you have any memories of Gene LaBelle
Oh
from a
yeah.
wrestling standpoint?
Gene LaBelle was an announcer and also wrestled at the Olympic.
Yes.
And they would call him Judo Gene LaBelle. And people may not realize this, but he did a lot of acting. You know,
Yes.
he'd be
Stunt
fighting
guy.
Bruce Lee on the Green Hornet, and if you watch Black Belt Jones with Jim Kelly, they did a lot of those films in L.A. And Gene LaBelle was, he was a rough-looking guy. His nose
Yeah.
was all mangled, and so he was always the bad guy in blaxploitation films, action films, TV. Guy had hundreds and hundreds of credits if you pull up his
Yeah.
IMDb, International Movie Database. So he was an interesting guy. He wrote martial arts books and he trained people, but he knew and worked with Bruce Lee. That's the level
Yeah.
of martial
One of the
arts.
4 or 5 guys he gave a black belt to, mind you.
Yeah.
So,
So
go ahead.
I mean, I don't know the exact history between them, but I know they worked together. And he died a few years ago, and he lived to a ripe old age. And just a colorful guy where he influenced many different industries. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For the kids who don't know who will hear this, I would say he was the Conor McGregor before there was Conor McGregor in MMA.
Famous martial artist who did a little of everything. Yeah.
And so anyway, I was educating her on Gene LaBelle and the different arts that he worked on. And
Black Belt Jones with Jim Kelly has a bunch of wrestlers in there. Earl Maynard, it's funny. Sometimes you watch a movie and out of nowhere you see wrestlers. I was watching this martial arts film, True Legend, which is great. And all of a sudden there's Heidenreich of all people, and a bunch of other wrestlers, some who I didn't even know, and they're fighting the martial artists because they're big, monstrous guys, and it looks great on screen. One of the things when we were making The Wrestler that I learned, I would pitch different guys to Aronofsky, and I did a half dozen casting calls for them as an associate producer and quote unquote the wrestling guy. He was judging guys cinematically, like what would they look like on screen. I'm coming from a wrestling fan or whatever. And like I said to Aronofsky, we're working on this 2006, 2007. I said, Nigel McGuinness is one of the best in the world. I said, you should bring him in. And he went with Romeo Roselli, who looked like a Greek god. So so he's looking at it differently than I would. And there were other guys. For the hardcore scene, I brought in lowlife Louis Ramos, who's very colorful and charismatic, great talker, but he said he's too small, that, Mickey would tower over him. Then I said, bring in from No Limit Soldiers, Cassius, who was a friend of mine. He was in WCW. So Master P's guys, No Limit Soldier, the big monstrous guy.
Yeah.
And his real name is Teddy Reed. We used to call him Teddy the Tank Reed on the Indies. And impressive looking guy. His muscles had muscles. And Darren's like, it's not going to work. He's going to tower over Mickey. It's not going to, Mickey's not going to look like a wrestler next to this guy. So, and that really tragic autograph scene, I was telling Darren, I was saying that we could get Moolah, Mae Young, all of them, Albano, everybody. And he debated and debated and debated for months. And finally he goes, Evan, I don't want Mickey to look like the what's wrong with this picture. I'm not going to bring all those guys
Yeah.
in. And the only two wrestlers in that scene, actual wrestlers, was Manny
Valiant.
Yarborough, who was a black sumo. He fought for UFC, and Johnny Valiant. Johnny Valiant had gray hair. He didn't look like, the Valiant brothers at that time. So Darren thought that worked better because Mickey looked the part. Yeah.
Well, you know who recently brought up the wrestler in an interview, and he was cast in the film in that one scene that you're talking about with Romeo was R-Truth, Ron
Oh yeah,
Killen.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I brought in R-Truth. Yeah, and
Yeah.
super nice guy, and
Oh, yeah.
not quite as well known at the time, but yeah, guy's
Yeah.
great. Good guy.
Yeah, he just talked about it on for those who listen to the different shows currently. He just was talking about it on a Chris Van Vliet show.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, he was promoting his experience with the wrestler and such. Since we're on the wrestling side of things, obviously, I don't think we ever talked about this on air per se, but I know you were close with her, Nicole Bass.
Oh
Where did
yeah.
that relationship start?
Nicole lived in my neighborhood, actually lived in my area, in Queens, New York, and I'd see her at we basically traveled the same circuit, the same indie shows, the same conventions, and we got to know each other. And her husband was a wonderful guy, but he had heart issues, and she ended up being his caretaker. And I ended up booking her for many different autograph appearances and wrestling shows and whatnot. And we became very close. And sometimes I would just meet her for lunch and we would talk. And she would bare her soul. Evan, it's not easy being different. It's not easy looking different. It's not easy being Nicole Bass all the time, having to be on, and then they always ask you questions about Howard Stern, and then the jokes, and
Yeah.
she didn't really mind. She didn't really mind so much, people teasing her, but sometimes we'd sit in the restaurant and she would pull out some makeup and she'd say, quote, Evan, sometimes I just want to look girly. I want to look pretty. She really bared her soul to me. And I get a call. This is all in the book. I do a whole story on her in the book. And I get a call. She's in the hospital. I walk in. Her tongue is hanging out of her mouth. And she's brain dead. Brain dead. And she has people surrounding her, and they're like, Evan, tell Nicole to wake up. And I'm looking at it, I'm no doctor, but I'm looking at it and I'm like, she's not waking up. So,
Yeah.
Nicole, please, please, we love you. Wake up, wake up. And the next morning they pulled the plug. So I was literally at her deathbed. That's how close we were. And yeah, so she's even on the cover of the book. That's how highly I regard her. And yeah, she was larger than life. And when she died, the wrestling people, she wasn't a great wrestler, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but she was a world champion bodybuilder. She had millions of fans from Howard Stern. And she still made it to ECW and WWE, which many people never did. So, here's somebody who was accomplished in three fields. The world's largest, she used to bill herself as the world's largest living female bodybuilder, living at the time, of course. So, yeah, it was very hard. I walked out of that hospital. I had to take a train home. I was shell shocked. I was like numb,
Mm-hmm.
I saw where it was heading. They weren't bringing her back, and yeah. So this book buries a lot of ghosts, a lot of things that really were painful, but also there's a lot of happy, funny stories. I could tell you a quick one. This won't sound funny, but 9/11, 2003, 2 years to the day, I'm getting on this little puddle jumper plane from Philly to New York with Johnny Valiant. And it's still fresh in our mind, 9/11. It's only 2 years ago, 2 years prior. And we're getting on this little 20-seater, and we're looking at the pilot. The guy looks like Lee Van Cleef. He looks rough. He looks rough, He looks like every terrorist that Chuck Norris kills in one of his movies. That's what this guy looks like. Usually these guys are all GQ, and every hair's in place. This guy looked like a bad guy in an action film. So Johnny looks at me, and I look at Johnny, and he goes, "You see this guy? You see this guy?" I'm like,
You believe this shit?
Yeah. So we get on the plane. We don't have much of a choice. We want to get home. And it's a 20-seater. It's a tiny little plane. And you feel every bump. You're hitting turbulence. And it's really like rattling. And we're like, is this going down into the ocean? I mean, so obviously it didn't. I'm sitting here talking to you. But, there's some funny stuff in there like that. And I'll tell you another quick funny story. We worked the Hollywood Collectors Show, and I'm on a bus with shuttle bus going back to the airport with
Is this the one with the Sheik?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So I'm on the bus with Captain Lou and Lanny and Nikolai and Sheik and Seika, the adult film legend. It's quite the crew. So this one woman gets on the bus. And I could see she's staring at Nikolai, and she's looking him up and down. And finally, she gets up the nerve and says, "Excuse me, are you Nikolai Volkoff?" And he was the warmest, nicest guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. And they start talking, and she does the shtick. I loved you as a kid. I went with my dad to see you, the standard stuff. And then finally, Nikolai, who's always gracious, says, "I'd like you to introduce my partner, the Sheik." And the Sheik is like half asleep, and he, it's 25 years after his heyday. And now she's looking the Sheik up and down. She's looking him sideways, and she goes, "That's not the Iron Sheik." And he flips out. We're on the bus. He flips out. And he goes, "You stupid jabroni, get out of my face."
He starts cutting a promo.
Oh my God, on the bus, loud. So she's like fleeing in terror, I mean, I'm laughing now, but at the time it was embarrassing, So yeah, man, there's some funny stuff in there being on the road with these guys. Greg Valentine, to entertain the boys on the road, he would do face first flops onto the hotel lobby carpet just to entertain the boys, and they would be howling because not everybody knows. Like, you're looking at a 60-year-old guy. Why is this guy falling
doing his face
down on the carpet? What's going on? And it was just funny. It was just funny. So there's a lot of happy memories. And
for those who get it, they get it.
Yeah, Greg Valentine would sleep on my couch also. We'd book him for autograph signings. So one day, I live in an apartment building. We walk out of my apartment, and all of a sudden, a car starts screeching, skidding. And the guy in the middle of traffic opens up his car door, points at Greg and goes, "You're Greg Valentine." And Valentine goes, "Yes, I am." And, the guy stopped the car in the middle of traffic. So, yeah, there's a lot of funny stuff in the book, too. And there's 100+ stories on here. And I didn't want to pummel people with, just death and tragedy. And, there's a lot in the wrestling business. So I try to make it a mix.
Obviously, you seen the movie Roadhouse. And it was funny. I was just having this conversation with my father. I didn't tell him the story because we were watching the Eagles game together for the NFC Championship. And fortunately, doing this for 13 years or give or take, coming up in June, I've gotten to know a lot of people. And I know three quite well from Roadhouse: Anthony DeLonges, Marshall Teague, who was the Jimmy the heel in the movie, and Julie Michaels, who was Jimmy's girlfriend in it. So anyway, I'm bringing this up because it has to do with wrestling, and obviously in the film was Terry Funk.
Yeah, he was great.
And Terry, not only in his book, but he would tell stories when I would see him in the early 2000s and get to hang out with him and such, about singing with a band at the after party for the rap party for the movie. And Joel Silver was a big producer at the time, the whole bit. And the wrestling fans will get this. Terry was just being Terry. I will put it that way. So apparently the band that was playing at this function was like, hey, they were wrestling fans. They knew who he was. Hey, you're Terry Funk and all. That's right. And of course, let's just say he may have had a few drinks in him at this point at the party. And he asked the band during the break when they were talking there, hey, is there any chance I could sing a song for you? Yeah, absolutely. Come on. You're always the entertainer. When we come up, we'll call you up. No problem. So band starts playing again. They get a song or two in, and then they go, hey, we'd like to introduce a guest singer, the whole bit. Terry Funk. He was involved with the movie. So former NWA champion. So bring him up. He go, hey, how you doing? And mind you, they said to him as they're just kind of drumming along, hey, what theme or is there a particular song you'd like to sing, Terry? Just go, I don't know. Just go into a style of Johnny Cash or whatever, right? Something, he gives them something. Okay, and I'll just wing it. Bad idea. So the way Terry would tell the story is that he would go, they start playing the music, and Terry, being Terry, wasn't the most PC person even back then. And then he would joke, I wonder why I never worked for Joel Silver again.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Forever! Forever!
So obviously I've asked Marshall, Anthony, and Julie, both on air and off. And I know when this episode comes out, my phone's going to ring, at least from Anthony. Hey, partner, what are you doing? Nobody had it. Nobody knew. Marshall said, I wasn't in the room. I've heard rumblings. Julie says, wasn't there, didn't see it. Totally believe her. Anthony gives me, and this is why my phone's going to ring, gives me the wink and a nod. I didn't see a partner type deal. But he knew what I was talking about. Yeah. We'll put it that way. So it was always funny that Terry goes, I don't understand why I worked for him the rest of my Hollywood career. Did you have any dealings with Terry Funk?
Yes, I asked him face to face, could I do an interview with you? And his response was, but then I'd have to tell the truth, which was an interesting. Yeah, so I regret I never interviewed him. I met him many times, and he was always friendly and just a lovely guy. It really hurt when he passed, but I wasn't friends or anything. I'm not going to exaggerate. We all did the same circuit, the conventions and such, and but he was one of my all-time favorites. I'd put him on my Mount Rushmore. Him and Sabu was unbelievable. I was at the I Quit match. Him and Ric Flair. That was as great a match as I ever saw live, and Terry was great. The guy was great.
It's funny because we talk about it all the time. I don't know how well you know my historian buddy, who also is a big wrestling guy as well, Brian Young. Brian knew him for the last couple of years of his life, Terry, and I knew Terry in the early 2000s. So it's like we commiserate, tell the stories and such. But I don't want to keep you here all night. But I'll ask this, and I'm curious. it hit me when you were talking about going to shows with your dad and stuff at the Garden, and you would see a San Martino, the Valiants, and this one and that one, just of that generation. Can you believe when you think about it? Because I do this all the time with what I do, and not just in wrestling, but in other forms. But can you believe that you fast forward to all these years later when you're an adult and stuff, that you got to build relationships and stuff with some of these guys?
Well, that's a big part of my book. I mean, there's Johnny Valiant sleeping on my couch. I was a Valiant Brothers fan. There's Greg Valentine. There's Lanny Poffo. I mean, these are dear friends, and it was almost surreal. Nikolai became a good friend, and etc. So on. Jimmy Valiant. I love Jimmy. I'm glad he's still with us at age 80. And
Still looks great, the Boogie Woogie Man.
yeah, Jimmy Valiant has more charisma than like the entire Raw roster. No,
In his
really.
pinky. In his pinky.
I mean, Jimmy, charisma off the charts. And this guy started in the 60s. He's still out there, not wrestling, but he's still out there on indie shows. And he's amazing, Jimmy. So
Where can people find a book? Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets.
Amazon. Amazon's the easiest. We have Kindle and ebooks and paperbacks, and or they could, if they want a copy from me, they could look me up on Facebook, Evan Ginzburg's Old School Wrestling Memories on Facebook, or just Evan Ginzburg. And but the easiest is Amazon. It'll be there in 2-3 days, and very proud of it. And it's from the heart, and basically it's telling my life in 100 or so stories in chronological order, but amazingly becoming friends with many of the people, even adult film legend Seika became a friend. Okay. And a lot of it's surreal. And and my mother was a wrestling fan, and her father, my grandfather, were wrestling fans. And my mother would just like mark out. She'd like, "You're friends with Killer Kowalski? He was so mean." And Nikolai loved my mom. Nikolai actually met my mom a bunch of times. And she's like, "He's so mean on TV, but he's so nice." It's like you go back to like when you were a Mark kid. And here's the words I never thought would come out of my mouth. And I tell this story in my book. I go, "For those of you who go back to the quote unquote golden age of porn, adult film legend Seika, these words came out of my mouth." I go, "Mom, this is Seika. Seika, Mom." This is, how it's utterly surreal, some of the experiences along the way. And how did I meet Seika? I booked Johnny Valiant for a convention, and we're sitting there, and this statuesque blonde is walking towards us, and I'm looking at her. I'm like, I know her. Who? And then I go, "That's Seika." As horny teens, we would watch her at the porno theater. They had porno theaters in the 70s. Okay, so I'm sitting there with her all weekend because it was a 3-day convention, and she's like telling me her whole life story. And her husband's there. It was totally platonic. We just hit it off, and we became friends. And to the point where I've actually visited her and gone. She's had parties, and she became a good friend. And she's on the cover of the book. Richard Pryor's on the cover of the book. I tell a story about Richard Pryor in there. Nicolas Cage. When we were doing The Wrestler, and there's a bunch of stories on the making of The Wrestler, one day Aronofsky has me be the point man to get Nicolas Cage from the garage at the Hammerstein Ballroom into the dressing room at a Ring of Honor show, because he's seeing Aronofsky. He's trying to get $18 million to do the movie, and he couldn't raise it on Mickey's name because at the time his star had diminished.
Yeah.
So he's thinking, we may have to go elsewhere. So he has me meet Nicolas Cage. Now, the day before, I'm standing in front of a classroom teaching English, and there I am. It's 2006 or 7, whatever. And this is one of the biggest movie stars in the world at that time.
Yeah.
And part of me is like marking out. And then I had this strange experience. I notice his clothes and I notice his shoes, and they're just an ordinary pair of shoes like anybody else. And it dawns on me, he's just another guy, even though he's rich, famous, powerful, he's super nice and with no airs about him, just a regular down-to-earth guy. So I take him backstage at Ring of Honor, and he's watching with me, and all of a sudden he goes, "Evan, is this real?" He thinks it's real because it's hard hitting Ring of Honor. I go, no, it's convincing looking, but it's predetermined. It's not real. And let me say this: wrestlers hate the word fake because they'll go, "My hip replacement wasn't fake. My knee replacement wasn't fake. My three divorces weren't fake, and my kids talking to me while we were on the road, 300 plus days a year isn't fake, So
many guys have said that.
yeah. So, I put an asterisk when I say it's not real because it was real enough to them, believe me. And in 350 days, we get into all of that, the injuries. And I've had wrestlers say to me, "Evan, I'm always in pain. Always in pain." They say, "You only have so many bumps on your bump card. At some point, something gives out." And I have a piece in my book. It's very poignant. It's called Butch Reed's Jacket. And I'll tell you the 30-second version. I'm interviewing Butch Reed for a project. And all of a sudden, he's trying to take off his jacket because it's hot under the lights when you're filming a movie.
Yeah.
And he's trying, and he's not making any progress because the arthritis is so bad. This is a guy that used to lift wrestlers over his head, throw him across the ring. You remember Doom and
Yeah, I know Butch Reed quite well.
Yeah, Butch Reed. I saw wrestle superstar Billy Graham at the Garden in a cage. He was a big name. So he's struggling, and now I'm struggling to interview him because he's distracted. He's hot, and he can't get the jacket off. So finally, one of the crew, I'm sitting across from him, one of the crew helps him take his jacket off. And during that interview, he's telling me, this is why wrestlers need health benefits. This is why wrestlers, need to be taken care of, after the glory, because they really sacrifice their bodies to entertain us. At the end, Lou Albano was in a wheelchair. Iron Sheik, I saw in a wheelchair. Abdullah the Butcher is now in a wheelchair. I saw Harley Race in a wheelchair. And it breaks your heart because as a kid, these guys are Supermen. Supermen. And, this book is not titles and, minutia and angles. This is about these guys as real human beings. And it's not just wrestling. I mean, there's teaching stories and stories about making the wrestler and making other films. But I think if you share some of these heroes, and we do, me and Jonathan, I think you'll be moved by this, and it's from the heart, and it's some of it, will hit you because we lost a lot of friends, relatives, and heroes along the way, all of us. And let me just say this. As you get older, one of the reasons wrestling is so important to you is because you look back and go, my dad used to take me to wrestling. My mom, my uncle, my aunt, my grandmother, my grandfather. And when you hit a certain age, most or all of them are gone. So my dad died when I was 20. So I look at going to wrestling with him as some of the greatest nights of my life because you shared it with your father. And those experiences were limited because he was gone when you were 20. So it's not your typical wrestling book. You're not going to get dates and title changes. That's been done to death. And it's a different kind of book, and I think the right reader will get it and appreciate it. And yeah.
I mentioned earlier, and I haven't talked about this per se publicly. People who about like what you're saying, and that it was my great grandfather that got me into wrestling at say 2.5, 3 years old when I started. And of course, it was that time period of Hogan, Andre going to WrestleMania 3, all that fun stuff. And there's VHS video, folks, which I'm currently in the process of trying to get digitalized, all that stuff to keep up to date. When my sister was born, there's my grandfather and my great grandfather, who both are gone at this point, messing with me at 3 years old, 2.5, 3 years old, wrestling on the floor. And my great grandfather, my Zeta Jack, would be like, "That's some of a bitch, Roddy Piper." That, you know what I mean? What he believed, and you know what I mean? I get it. And it's like kind of what I mentioned to you, where I asked you a few minutes ago about, can you believe some of these people we've gotten to meet along the way? Some of them being our heroes and such.
And becoming friends and becoming almost like family. I mean, when people sleep on your couch while you're on the road, sharing hotel rooms and what happens is, we would, as an agent, we would book tons of legends, and they start, pouring their heart out, and also they're telling you about the ripoffs and the abuses, and basically back in the day, it was pay as you will. This is what the promoter gave you, and nobody's doing the accounting. You take it. You don't make waves. You don't want to lose your spot. Also, they would wrestle hurt because they were in fear of losing their spot. I'll tell you a crazy story.
Go ahead.
The Valiant Brothers are wrestling one night. Jimmy pulls out a blade and accidentally nicks Johnny in the eyeball. Not in the eye area, in the eye. Ooh. Johnny's blind in one eye, wrestles the match. He doesn't flee to the dressing room. He's entertaining thousands of people. Wrestles the match. The next night, wrestles blind in one eye, wrestles the match. Finally, 2 or 3 days later, flies home to Pittsburgh and goes to the eye doctor, and they managed to fix it. But these are some tough guys. But the other side of it is they were in fear of losing their spot, losing their push, losing their ability to make a living. And wrestlers need better. They need unions, or at bare minimum pensions, 401ks, health benefits, or a fund to help them at the end. Triple H gets on the press scrum. We broke the box office record, after obscenely raising the prices. And they'll boast, we made X amount, millions of dollars the gate today. Yeah, well, superstar Billy Graham died needing a GoFundMe. Virgil died needing a GoFundMe. Bushwhacker Butch died needing a GoFundMe. You know, take 1/2 of 1%
Then
of the fund, and excuse me, and make a fund like the NFL did. The NFL is not benevolent either. You know, they had to kind of be shamed into it, but they actually did it. So help these guys. You know, none of these guys should have to lose a house or, not have money for hospital bills or disgracefully need money to be buried. How many how many gimmicks, how much merch did the Bushwhackers sell? Why should Bushwhacker Butch need a GoFundMe at the end? I mean, you know, and the corporate apologists, oh, they all pissed away fortunes on wine, women, and song. No, no, you have no idea what you're talking about. Johnny Valiant, #1 tag team in the world. He never broke 100 grand. There was no fortune to piss away, and he was careful with his money. Okay, so you can't make some blanket statement to defend a ruthless billion-dollar corporation. They all pissed away fortunes on wine, women, and song. It's just not
that
true.
wasn't the case.
Some did. You could even say many did, but
Not all.
a lot of them never made fortunes. Believe me.
Yeah. But what I was gonna say was saying there is I wish that Zeta Jack was around so I could have said, "Hey, this is so and so," and introduce them to people. But because of it, I'll end with this, and obviously because it's a hot topic lately, I'm sure you've seen things about this. Has been for a couple of years now accusations against Bobby Fulton and his son, and things have been coming to a head, at least when you look at social media and such. And I have a pretty good idea for knowing people in the convention circuit and the different avenues and such. Are you knowing where I'm going with this?
Well, I know of the scenario. I mean, I don't.
Well, what
I
are you
don't
thinking
I
from
don't
what
know
you
these
know?
guys. I know them from the wrestling community. I don't have any inside info on what did or didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm not taking. I only going what I've heard. You know what I mean? Because I take it with a grain of salt because I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it. But would you say it surprises you what you've heard?
Um, I've always liked Bobby. His son, I don't know at all. I mean, I don't know what did or didn't happen. There's always scandals in wrestling, and I think like anything else, you have to prove it in a court of law. And I mean, I've dealt with sleazebag promoters over the years, and it's in the book. One night I booked Johnny to wrestle Jimmy Snooker on a New Jersey indie. And they're not kids anymore. They're in their 50s. They're putting on a good match considering their age. Snook is the face, Johnny's the heel. Johnny pulls out his New York City Metro card and rakes Jimmy's eyes, and he's selling it like he's blinded. So fans are entertained. The place is packed. We go to get Johnny's fee, which is the Herculean amount of $350. It's not a fortune of money by any means. And the promoter is doing guys, the house was a little light tonight. I said, every seat was full. And he's standing his ground. Can you take a little less? I said, the guy's a WWE Hall of Famer. He's not a kid anymore. Pay him what you promised him. I'm a school teacher, so now I'm like, I'm being.
You're playing the heavy.
Yeah, I'm like, pay him what you promised him. Okay, so he begrudgingly hands him the $350, and he never let Johnny work for him again. Like we were somehow the bad guys. So yeah, you do deal with dirtbags, and it's another time. This is actually a funny story. I booked Johnny for a convention. God, where was it? It was like Ohio. And the promoter, the prom the promoter, there's like nobody there. It's like a torrential downpour. It's the first night of the World Series. It's like this wasn't planned out well. And he's counting off cash to pay the wrestlers. And it's like a line, like we're all waiting to get paid. And it's going from like 50s to 20s to 10s to 5. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to play out. So we're like the last guys that they take care of, and whichever wrestlers were behind us, I doubt they got their money. And this has happened multiple times over the years. So it is what it is, and you hear of various scandals. And what I've found in wrestling is if enough people say this guy's okay, usually he's okay. If enough people say this guy's shady, then this guy's shady. That's a blanket, rule as an agent. You go, okay, I hear this guy's good to deal with. He's honest. I hear this guy isn't so much, and you avoid him. And I mean, I've had guys, tell me so-and-so's booked. And then at the last second, they'll go, I never said they were booked. He said, we had this conversation, because all of a sudden he got somebody else or he was low on cash. You follow? So as an agent, you deal with all types, and it could be a very ugly business. And let me say this. Okay.
They're not all Scott Epsteins, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, there's a piece on Scott Epstein. He was one of the honest agents, and he was a dear friend. Past tense, he's gone too. So it's a very tough business, and you basically get in a plane, train, automobile in the hope that you're going to get what you were promised. Sometimes you could get half up front, but that doesn't mean you're going to get the other half.
Heard that story before.
Yeah, it's a tough business. And what I was going to say was, you go to a convention as a fan, and it feels very glamorous. Let's say a Chiller convention. That's a major convention in Jersey. Okay.
Parsippany.
Yeah. So you go to Chiller. There's the ex-wrestlers, the ex-boxers, the ex-rock stars, the ex-porn queens, the ex-playmates, and the ex-TV stars, the ex-everything. And once in a while, you'll have somebody that's still pretty big, like a William Shatner or whatnot. But for the most part, it's like the playing field has been evened, and these legends, stars, former stars, whatever the case may be, they need the payday. They need that payday. It's not that it's glamorous. People don't realize. If I had $1 for every time I went to a convention and there's Sonny or Missy Hyatt or Virgil or Ox Baker sitting across from me, they needed that payday. And it is what it is. And some of them are wonderful people. Some of them aren't. Some of them are absolute, mess. And, the ex-playmates would inevitably come in. They're all discombobulated. They're late. They're fixing their hair. They're fixing their makeup. And they're living off of this centerfold from 1984. And the dateless wonders are coming in, and they this is like their fantasy girl, but it's not 1984, and she, it is what it is. It's not all that glamorous, but at the same time, you can meet some wonderful, wonderful people, and they become your friends, and you realize they're human beings just like you. In spite of the fact that they were in your favorite movie or TV show or wrestling match or whatever the case may be. So, and a lot of this I chronicle in the book, being on the road with these people, the good, the bad, and ugly of it.
Well, the book is Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. The author, Evan Ginzburg. Thank you so much, sir, for doing this
Thank
last
you
segment.
for your support and friendship all these years. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Chaim. Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
This is Supermouth Dave Drayson. I'm listening to Crazy Train, the best in the world right now. Please. And if you're lucky, Supermouth will be back.